Okay, so we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I'd like to begin by recognizing that we are gathered here today on unceded, unsurrendered Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. On behalf of the city, I'd like to welcome councillors, city staff, members of the public, and the media. I see councillors Carr, Curry, Kavanaugh, Bradley, Devine, Leeper, Lowe, and Councillor Troster in the room with us. And I believe online we have Councillor Gower. Just check if there's other councillors online. So I know there's a lot of staff members as well from councillors' offices online. I see Councillor Gower, though, himself online. Thank you for joining us for this technical briefing. Today, we will discuss the Solid Waste Master Plan, which will be coming to committee and council this month for final approval after a 5-year planning journey, which many of us have been through together. This plan will guide how we manage waste sustainably over the next 30 years. It's accompanied by and supported by a new long-range financial plan, which sets out how we'll keep waste services cost-effective and affordable in the long term. The Solid Waste Master Plan is designed to guide us toward our vision of a zero-waste Ottawa while tackling the waste-related challenges and needs we're facing as our city grows. Ottawa is generating far more garbage than it can manage sustainably. The population is growing, and the amount of waste the city will need to manage is forecasted to increase by 31% over the plan's term. The city's landfill is almost full, and without immediate changes, it could reach capacity between 2034 and 2035. The waste plan doesn't offer one magic bullet solution to these challenges. Instead, it offers a list of actions that tackle the problem from many different angles, including things like investing in education and promotion, repair cafes, helping reduce that waste from the curb that you're seeing out there, community reuse, forums, the green bin into all multi-residential buildings, reducing single-use plastics, parks collection innovation, and food waste reduction. Combined, the waste plan's actions significantly reduce the amount of waste going to landfill, reduce GHG emissions, divert valuable resources to be recycled and repurposed into new products, and further preserve and expand capacity at the Trail Waste Facility landfill. Extending the landfill's lifespan will provide time for the city to study and plan its next waste disposal solution. The long-range financial plan lays out the operating requirements and capital needs, as well as how we will fund them while increasing service. The plan recommends increasing revenues for waste services in an equitable and predictable way to ensure that the city can continue to deliver service, plus all the potential benefits of the waste plan, including extending the landfill life by 14 years. What residents can expect now and in the future is to pay a fair price for efficient, reliable waste collection service, while we invest in actions that will help build a green and resilient city for generations to come. Now, staff will provide an overview of both plans. With us today from Public Works and Financial Services to deliver the presentation, we have Alain Gantier, General Manager, Isabel Jasmine, Deputy City Treasurer, Shelley McDonald, Director of Solid Waste Services, and Nicole Hoover-Bienes, Program Manager of Long-Term Planning. They'll be available to answer your questions today. After the briefing, I'll open the floor for questions from council members, beginning with one question and one follow-up. I'm just going to go by hands up or hands up online instead of word by word. If time permits, additional questions can be posed once all members have their turn. And when members of council have asked their questions, we'll take a short recess before resuming with the media availability. I'll now hand it over to Alain Gantier.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Bon matin à tous. It's an exciting day for the team that's sitting in front of you today, for the city, its residents, and our future as it pertains to waste management. Waste management is a universal challenge. The safe, efficient, and sustainable management of waste directly affects the health and cleanliness of our entire community. And it's made more complex with the growing population, changing waste composition, as well as industry and lifestyle trends that are impacting the quantities and contents of waste, which requires management. In
the past 5 years, our team have been dealing with the development of this plan by getting the opinion of stakeholders and consulting the community, and by focusing on technical experience.
On developing the waste plan. Concurrently, Isabel Jasmine and her finance team developed a long-range financial plan for solid waste, which provides funding structures for two options: the status quo, if we maintain the current path we're on, or a system that incorporates a recommended solid waste management plan. Legislative reports for both will be released immediately following this technical briefing. Next slide. Maintenant, avant de parler des deux rapports, permettez-moi de vous donner le contexte de
Before
l'exposé
talking about the two reports, I'd like to give you the context.
de nos services de gestion des déchets. The city is
Oh.
mandated to provide curbside residential properties with waste and organics collection. In addition, as a result of prior council approvals, we provide waste management services to some multi-residential properties, small businesses, and schools. And we also service on-street receptacles and those in parks. The collection of waste from industrial, commercial, and institutional sector, as well as the responsibility for waste for the construction and demolition sector, falls under the purview of the province of Ontario. So for the purposes of the solid waste master plan and the long-range financial plan, staff have included all sectors currently approved and mandated to be serviced by the city. Next slide, please. En vous donnant une idée des services que nous assurons
By
aujourd'hui,
giving you an idea of the services that we have today, we will go over the funding of the services that we have now.
being asked to consider the solid waste master plan, they're also being asked to consider how the future of solid waste should be funded. Ottawa provides exceptional waste management services. And as you can see, we charge some of the lowest fees to residents amongst comparative municipalities. Now, this may not come as a surprise to you as you look at this visual, but our services are not sufficiently funded. And increased costs are required to continue services as they are offered today, and this is regardless of the new waste plan. When you look at the graph, in 2023, Edmonton, Toronto, and Vancouver residents paid more than double what Ottawa residents paid. And I can assure you, these municipalities did not get double the service. But we are at a critical juncture in solid waste where we're planning for the short, the medium, and the long-term future, and we need to be prepared for the inevitable costs to come. So when we present the 30-year long-range financial plan later this morning, we will again highlight these cities to give you a point of reference for how we anticipate future cost comparing. So more on this later in the presentation. Next slide. So with an overview of the sectors we service and the fees we pay for the services in comparison to other Canadian municipalities, I'd like to formally dive into the first part of today's presentation, the Ottawa Solid Waste Master Plan. Donc, quel est le plan?
So what is it and why is it needed? There's no one to better to explain than Shelley McDonald, the Director of Solid Waste Services.
Thank you, Alain, and good morning, everyone. The Solid Waste Master Plan is a 30-year plan providing direction to sustainably manage the city's waste. It looks at initiatives for the short term, now until 5 years, medium term, 6 to 10 years, and the long term, 11 years and beyond, to divert as much waste as possible from the landfill, recover the maximum resources and energy from the remaining garbage, and dispose of residual waste in an environmentally sustainable way, all while keeping waste management affordable. Ottawa's population is expected to reach 1.5 million by 2053. More people means more waste, and the amount of waste the city will need to manage is forecasted to increase by 31% over the next 3 decades. Increasing waste reduction and reuse helps to keep the cost of managing waste down and prevent the extraction of natural resources. The city's owned and operated Trail Waste Facility landfill is estimated to be full between 2034 and 2035 if today's disposal habits remain the same. The good news, once people make changes to their disposal habits, they seem to carry these forward, and this has extended benefits. The Solid Waste Master Plan aligns with council priorities, strategic priorities, and is in alignment with the city, provincial, and federal targets and initiatives. Waste management contributes directly to greenhouse gas emissions, particularly through the release of methane from organics contained in the landfill. Methane is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. Diverting more organics from landfill can support the city's climate change initiatives. Next slide, please. As mentioned, developing this plan has been a 5-year process. We started our journey in 2019 with the previous term of council approving the framework for the plan's development, the comprehensive communications and engagement strategy, and the councillor sponsors group, which has been key and continues to provide valuable insight for the project's success. In 2020, despite the world slowing down, we went full steam ahead. Phase 1 is highlighted in blue on this timeline and provides council with key baseline information and data on the city's current waste management system, available mechanisms to influence waste reduction and diversion, an overview of detailed international research on emerging policy, program, and technology trends, and provided council with an overview of the proposed engagement approach. This phase was received by council in June 2020. Phase 2, as shown in blue and green on the timeline, involved engaging with stakeholders on the vision statement, guiding principles and goals that will provide the framework for the waste plan. This phase also involved identifying future waste management needs, the long list of options to be considered to meet these needs, and the evaluation methodology to evaluate each option to develop a short list of options for consultation. Council received Phase 2 in July 2021 and approved the vision statement, guiding principles and goals for the waste plan. As a reminder, the council-approved vision for the waste plan is a zero waste Ottawa achieved through progressive, collective, and innovative action, with the goals of the waste plan primarily following the 5R waste hierarchy framework that places top priority on reducing or preventing the generation of waste, followed by recycling, recovery, and finally disposal. Zero waste is a philosophy and a call to action rather than an absolute target. Zero waste requires a concerted effort and coordination between all levels of government, as well as industry, businesses, and consumers. Phase 3, as shown in green and orange, involved developing the draft waste plan with recommended actions and associated implementation plans and timelines. This was received by council last year. Engagement, whether through engagement series 1, 2, or 3, or touch points with council and key stakeholders, has been crucial throughout the development of the Solid Waste Master Plan. We said at the onset back in 2019 that engagement with the public, stakeholders, staff, and councillors would be critical to developing a community-built and bought-into plan. I can confidently say that what we're presenting you today fits within that goal. And now we've reached completion, with the final waste plan coming to council for consideration later this month. Next slide, please. Engagement has been fundamental throughout the Solid Waste Master Plan's development and will continue to be critical as actions are planned for and implemented. Throughout the development of the Solid Waste Master Plan, we have had over 8,100 stakeholder and members of the public participate in one of the engagement series sessions. We've received over 5,300 public survey responses, held over 10 meetings with our stakeholder sounding board and councillor sponsors groups, hosted 10 virtual focus groups and 4 interviews with equity deserving groups, and had over 300 participants in online dialogue sessions. To ensure Ottawa's diversity is reflected in the Solid Waste Master Plan, we've engaged with many diverse groups across the city and incorporated what we've learned in the Solid Waste Master Plan. This has included groups that represent persons with disabilities, members of the SLGBTQIA+ groups, suburban, urban, and rural communities, older adults, women, youth, and newcomers. Next slide, please. As Alain mentioned in his opening remarks, the Solid Waste Master Plan and Long Range Financial Plan legislative reports will be released immediately following this technical briefing. The Solid Waste Master Plan report recommendations are as follows: that council approve of the Solid Waste Master Plan, including actions and initiatives to support Ottawa's future waste management system, as outlined in this report. In approving the solid waste master plan, Council is approving the framework that will guide solid waste management activities and policy development. It also outlines resources and funding required to meet the goals of the plan. The second recommendation seeks Council direction for staff to immediately begin planning and implementation for action suites scheduled for year 1 of the solid waste master plan, with an update on implementation progress to be provided 12 months post-implementation. There will be multiple touchpoints with Council to provide updates and seek necessary approvals on critical decisions moving forward, including when new policies, strategy, and feasibility studies and business cases are developed. Every year, staff will present a progress report to Council on the various initiatives that were approved for planning and implementation the year before. Staff will also present the next year's work plan to Council, seeking approval to proceed with that work. The waste plan will also be refreshed every 5 years to ensure the city remains adaptable and flexible to the new trends and regulatory changes that may come forward. Lastly, this report recommends that Council receive the What We Learned report from Engagement Series 3, attached to supporting document 2. I will now hand the presentation over to Nicole to walk us through the details of each of the report recommendations.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelley, and good morning, everyone. So as Shelley mentioned, the first report recommendation is seeking Council's approval of the waste plan, including the actions and initiatives recommended to support Ottawa's future waste management system. There are 5 core objectives that were developed to present and help measure how the recommended actions will work directly towards achieving the vision and goals of the waste plan that Council had set forth. The objectives follow the waste hierarchy, which is the core policy framework that Council approved for staff to follow when developing the waste plan. The solid waste master plan includes 25 proposed action suites that drive change and work towards meeting the vision and the goals of the waste plan over the next 30 years. The recommended actions, they're multifaceted and interconnected. And the timing for implementation is broken out, as Shelley had highlighted, in the short term, the medium term, as well as the long term. In terms of targets, the waste plan overall aims to decrease the amount of waste disposed by the community within households, city facilities, our parks and public spaces by 15% in 2029 and by 23% by 2034 compared to our 2024 baseline. It's also a target to increase the amount of organics captured by diversion programs by 14% by 2029 and by 20% by 2034 compared to the 2024 baseline. So for the next few slides, I'm going to be walking through an overview of each of those objectives and the corresponding action suites and actions that we are recommending as part of the waste plan, followed by a timeline overview and anticipated key outcomes of the waste plan. Next slide, please. So I recognize this is a busy slide. The next few slides will also be quite busy, but we felt it was really important to share the details of the various actions that we're recommending, as they are the meat of the plan. And they truly reflect what it's going to take to drive change to meet Council's goals to manage waste in a more sustainable and fiscally responsible way that also reflects the service enhancements that we heard through engagement are important to Ottawans. So objective 1 focuses on waste avoidance, reduction and reuse initiatives, food waste reduction, and education and diversion at special events. So as you can see, there are 9 actions under this objective, and they are all prioritized for implementation in the short term, so the first 5 years of the waste plan. And they are recommended to begin immediately to decrease waste that's generated in the first place. So just a couple examples of the actions that focus on events, such as repair cafes and supporting and initiating a range of community reuse events, enhancing our textile diversion program, just to name a few. So reducing and reusing waste is cost-effective for taxpayers, as it minimizes the amount of waste that needs to be managed in our disposal facilities. So engagement participants, as Shelley had touched on at a high level, they frequently mention the importance of prioritizing waste reduction and reuse to help protect the environment and keep waste management costs down. There also, of course, remains a significant opportunity to target food waste reduction, especially at a time where food insecurity and affordability are certainly top of mind for our residents. Next slide, please. Objective 2 looks to maximize the recycling of waste and improving improving existing initiatives and investing in new recycling programs to reduce items that can be reused, recycled, and repurposed. So essentially those items that are going to landfill today. It creates an opportunity to lower life cycle greenhouse gas emissions and create opportunities to gain new revenue streams to help offset some of our waste management costs. So there are 17 actions recommended under this objective that represent the largest impact on keeping waste out of our landfill. And they are also recommended for prioritization in the short term in order to drive change. So some of these action suites may look a little familiar as some of them are already underway, including the implementation of the 3-item garbage limit later this September, and rolling out mandatory organics at multi-residential facilities. A number of new initiatives and service enhancements for residents that residents will see should council approve the plan include a citywide parks diversion program, given the success that we've seen with our ongoing pilot, reducing single-use items in our city operations and city programming, recycling of home construction and renovation waste, a bulky waste recycling program, and a new strategy to coordinate and fund hazardous waste events, given the transition to individual producer responsibility and the role that the city the city no longer having a prominent role to play in this sector. So that's just to name a few. Next slide, please. So while reduction and diversion actions will reduce the amount of waste going to landfill, there will still be waste that cannot be captured through those programs, and we need a means to be able to manage that. So the 10 actions within Objective 3 look at recovering resources as well as energy in keeping with the Solid Waste Master Plan guiding principles to treat waste as a resource. So a number of the actions supporting this objective are also underway as a result of council direction. So as council will recall, the terms of reference for the trail waste facility expansion within its current footprint is currently underway. It's a process that we do anticipate to take between 5 and 10 years for a decision from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. The city will also begin to leverage the use of private sector landfills in 2026 to help reduce waste going to the trail waste facility and landfill, but it will also help increase operational efficiencies, helping to reduce our collection costs. As council will recall, a motion was approved during the tabling of the draft waste plan back in December for the city to advance the feasibility study and business case for both waste to energy incineration as well as mixed waste processing, and comparing that alongside landfilling as a future solution once our current landfill reaches capacity. So because residual waste management technologies can take between 10 to 15 years to become operational due to environmental planning approval, siting, community engagement, as well as design and construction, council will receive a recommendation following the detailed feasibility study and business case for Ottawa's next residual waste management solution to consider by midway through next year, in order to make the critical decision on what comes next, again, once our landfills has reached capacity. I think it's important to mention here too that while the waste plan recommends direction on new technologies, the majority of the options under this objective do require fulsome business cases to be developed and consider the financial, the environmental, as well as the regulatory implications, benefits, and risks. So council will see each of those feasibility studies and business cases brought forward in future years. So other action suite updates and approvals will be provided and sought in next year, including the recommended strategy for how we are going to be managing our landfill gas, given our current contract expires in 2027, and also implementing a ban on non-residential waste from the trail waste facility landfill beginning next year. Next slide, please. The first 3 objectives focused on actions that can directly influence the management of waste and the 5 levels of the waste management hierarchy. And the 9 actions within Objective 4 focus on maximizing operational advancements through innovation and new technology to make our operations more efficient, less impactful on the environment, and they also help support improving customer service and program accessibility. So if approved, 9 actions will support working towards Objective 4. And as these actions primarily speak to future planning and potential service enhancements, their impacts on waste reduction, diversion, and expanded landfill capacity, they're a little bit difficult to predict at this time. So as we're diving into the planning phase for each of those actions, that will give us a better sense of how these actions under this objective will support improving customer service, again, program accessibility, operational efficiency, and overall system success. Next slide, please. While the solid waste master plan will require the community to change how they view and manage waste to be successful, moving towards the vision of zero waste will also require a significant shift in our social norms. So Objective 5 looks to develop a zero waste culture across the city and includes 2 fundamental action suites. One that's grounded in enhancing the city's investment in promotion and education efforts that better aligns with comparator municipalities, and another focusing on a circular economy strategy that aligns with provincial and federal efforts. And the premise of a circular economy is to transition away from the traditional take, make, dispose economic model to one where we recognize the value of waste as a resource. So municipalities, we certainly have strong influence over the physical development of a city, the management of our assets, and the procurement of public goods and services. So we have access to a number of different urban policy levers that can play a significant role to bring about changes to the use and management of materials and resources within our community. So that's what this strategy would be focusing on. So combined, these actions will be instrumental in guiding and supporting the community to shift their waste management practices to become more sustainable. Next slide, please. So as Chair Menard had spoke to in his opening remarks, the waste plan aims to create more opportunities to reduce, reuse, and recycle waste, resulting in increased landfill life. It's about providing improved customer service, enhanced operational efficiencies to ensure that the city will continue to deliver efficient and reliable service to our community in an affordable and fiscally responsible way. So over the 30-year term of the solid waste master plan, the recommended actions are expected to reduce waste by over 31,000 tons, divert over 970,000 tons of waste from landfill, and extend the life of the landfill by 14 years. So this collectively helps provide additional time to build our reserve funds, as Isabel is going to touch on later in the presentation, to save for this larger capital investment, and also buying time for council to determine the city's next residual waste management solution. The estimated reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from landfill resulting from the proposed waste reduction and diversion actions, as well as investment in generating renewable energy from the processing of organic food waste, is estimated at just over 9,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year. And this is equivalent to removing just over 2,750 passenger vehicles from our roads each and every year. Next slide, please. In the first 5 years of the plan, staff are recommending the focus be on implementing waste reduction, diversion, zero waste initiatives, and operational advancements, as well as undertaking those feasibility studies and business cases for new residual waste management technologies, many of which are recommended to start, of course, within the first two years. Implementing these actions early will immediately impact the amount of waste going to landfill, will help keep waste management costs down, and buys us additional time for council to make those decisions on the next solution once the Trail Road landfill is full. So regular maintenance, program reviews, and enhancements of these action suites will take place over the medium and long term. So moving into the bottom of the slide here, critical decisions will be required by council before the end of this term on the next organics processing technology and facility, given our current contract ends in 2030. A new contract and approach for managing landfill gas and generating renewable energy, given our current contract ends in 2027. And the feasibility study and business case for the city's next residual waste management solution. So of course, these feasibility studies and business cases for these actions are taking place in the short term for implementation in the mid and long term. And as I mentioned earlier, because again, these technologies require extensive provincial environmental planning approval, siting, community engagement, design and construction timeframes, decisions need to be made in the short term within this term of council to have these solutions and contracts in place in order to meet our regulatory and compliance requirements. Next slide, please. So now that we've walked you through the high-level overview of the plan, recommendation 2, as Shelley had spoke to, seeks council's direction for staff to immediately begin the planning and implementation for action suites that are recommended for scheduled for year 1 of the solid waste master plan, with an update on implementation progress to be provided 12 months post-implementation. So there are 15 actions that are proposed for planning and implementation in year 1, with an additional 8 actions being to begin planning in year 1 for implementation in later years of the plan. So some examples of those actions include enhancing our diversion from city facilities, enhancing investment in promotion and education, waste reduction actions such as expanding repair cafes across the city, developing a bulky waste recycling strategy, implementing a citywide parks diversion program, and then undertaking those feasibility studies and business case for energy or waste to energy incineration, mixed waste processing, and the anaerobic digestion of food waste. So as Shelley had mentioned earlier in the presentation, there will be multiple touch points with council and members of the public throughout action planning and implementation to provide updates, but also to seek the necessary approvals on those critical decisions moving forward, including when new policies, strategies, and feasibility studies and business cases are developed. So every year, staff will present that progress report to council on those initiatives that have been, we've been working on planning and implementing the year before. We'll present the next year's work plan and seek council's approval to proceed with that work. And required funding that will align with the council-approved long-range financial plan will be presented as part of the annual budget process. And Isabel's going to walk through that in a little bit more detail shortly. Alrighty, next slide, please. So recommendation 3 seeks council's receipt of Engagement Series 3, the What We Learned report. So the purpose of the last and final engagement series was to share the details of the final waste plan with residents and stakeholders, explain how previous engagement has been incorporated into the plan, but also to receive feedback and to gauge general support in the community for the solid waste master plan. So our third and final engagement series took place between February and March this year, and we received engagement from just over 520 participants. And we sought feedback through a variety of means that are outlined on the slide here. So we continued with our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion by offering our survey in 5 languages and providing a 2-page fact sheet of the solid waste master plan in 10 different languages, and by seeking feedback directly from equity deserving groups through focus groups. So generally, participants were satisfied with how their feedback was incorporated into the solid waste master plan and the recommendations that you're seeing today. And most said that they would certainly be participating in future engagement opportunities. Some key things, common themes that we heard: participants reaffirm the importance of prioritizing the 5 R's waste hierarchy. There was certainly a common desire for more reuse, repair type events across the cities, expanding the Take It Back program, and more convenient and accessible hazardous waste depots, electronics recycling, and textile diversion. Participants were conscious of the fact that we are running out of landfill space, and there's a recognition that there will be a need for a new landfill or a new residual waste management solution within the next 30 years. Residents generally supported landfill expansion and new landfills, and supported new technologies with a strong focus on waste to energy incineration, given it is a proven technology in operation around the world. Recycling and composting were acknowledged as tried and true methods for managing our waste, with many participants in multi-residential properties highlighting the desire for that consistent access to composting programs. Many residents expressed frustration over challenges with excessive packaging and the desire for businesses and producers to become more responsible for their packaging. And the last common theme we gathered from Engagement Series 3 was The waste plan is a little bit complicated. It's technical. And there were certainly many people who were interested in learning more specifics about the recommended actions and how they were prioritized for implementation. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we incorporated that feedback into the waste plan that you will be receiving over the next few months at committee, or next few weeks, pardon me, at committee and council, there are no fundamental changes between the draft waste plan that was presented to council last November and today. But based on that feedback through engagement, we added more details to explain the intent of some of those actions and how they were prioritized in the waste plan's planning and implementation timeline. Summary documents were added to help explain the more technical and complex concepts in the plan, including detailed summaries of the financial analysis as well as the GHG analysis that was done when developing the plan. And frequently heard barriers and considerations and suggestions to overcome those barriers shared by residents and stakeholders have been documented for use for the implementation planning of relevant actions. Next slide, please. So to sum things up before I hand the presentation over to our Deputy City Treasurer to walk through the recommended long-range financial plan, the Solid Waste Master Plan presents a framework and guide for investment in reducing, diverting, and managing waste over the next 30 years. It presents tangible opportunities to extend the life of the landfill, enhance services to residents, and reduce the environmental impact of managing waste in a financially sustainable manner. As the recommended policies, again, and strategies, feasibility studies, and business cases are developed, they will be presented to council for consideration. We will be providing those regular updates to council on an annual basis. As part of those regular updates, we will be presenting details on implementation progress, performance, program performance, which will also allow ample opportunity to shift if programs are not achieving the intended outcomes. The waste plan will be refreshed every 5 years to ensure the city remains adaptable and flexible to new trends and regulatory changes. And with that, I'll pass the remainder of the presentation over to Isabelle.
Thank you, Nicole. So now I will provide an overview of the Solid Waste Long-Range Financial Plan. Je vais maintenant donner un aperçu du plan financier à long terme pour les déchets solides. The Long-Range Financial Plan is a companion report to the Solid Waste Master Plan. It has been developed to provide committee and council with the assurance that based on the current projections, the Solid Waste Master Plan is affordable. Until now, solid waste has been funded from a variety of revenue sources without a long-term funding plan. The recent changes imposed by the province in the development of a solid waste master plan with clear action items has helped to clarify the short to medium-term investment requirements as a first step to establishing a longer-term funding plan for this service. Next slide. The long-range financial plan is exactly that. It is a plan to fund solid waste services over the long term that will evolve over time. The LRFP includes estimated costs for both operating and capital over the next 28 years to 2053. Le plan comprend une estimation des coûts de fonctionnement et d'investissement au cours de 28 prochaines années jusqu'en 2053. Les 10 premières années sont plus prévisibles, mais les
The first 10 years are more predictable, but the last 18 are not, and include various assumptions that may change over time.
The first 10 years are more predictable, but at the last 18 years are not, and include various assumptions that may change over time. The LRFP will evolve over time as new technologies are explored and council decides on the direction that should be taken. The financial implications of 2 options were assessed, a status quo scenario and a scenario where we implement the Solid Waste Master Plan's recommended actions. In both scenarios, there are costs that are regulatory requirements and are unavoidable regardless of which option council chooses. The cost of providing garbage and organics collection services to residents is mandated. There are also provincial legislation changes related to recyclables that will eliminate a revenue stream for the city. Funding the closure and post-closure costs once the trail facility reaches capacity is required for both options. But as you will see later, delaying that cost as much as possible has significant financial benefits. As I mentioned earlier, there is still much that has not been decided yet related to new technologies, and staff are conducting a feasibility study and business case to assess those options. For the purposes of this initial long-range financial plan, We have included an assumption and very conservative cost estimates for a new landfill or residual waste management solution, but have not included the financial implications or estimates for a waste to energy or incineration solution for now. As I describe the financial implications of status quo versus the solid waste master plan, you will clearly see the financial benefits of extending the life of the landfill, pushing the cost of a new landfill further out, and giving the city time to establish greater financial stability. Next slide. One of the key recommendations in this report is to move to a fully recoverable fee for solid waste services, similar to water and wastewater services. Currently, solid waste services are funded from both tax and fees and supplemented by other revenues. Waste diversion, which includes recyclables and organics, is funded from property taxes. For the average residential property valued at $415,000, that equates to $56 annually, plus the garbage fee of $145 for a total of $201. A property owner that has a home valued at $830,000 would be paying more or closer to $257 for the exact same service. Also, business property taxes include a waste diversion component, even though they do not receive the service. It made sense to fund waste diversion from tax when it was first introduced to recognize the fact that commercial businesses produce or contribute to recyclables. But with recent regulatory changes, with the move to individual producer responsibility and the eventual loss of recyclables revenue in 2026, this is the right time to shift to a more fee-based charge and away from tax funding. You will note that the solid waste charge remained at the same level from 2013 to 2019, which resulted in year-over-year deficits. We have been increasing the rate in the past 5 years to bring it more in line with the funding requirement. Solid waste services are also funded from other supplementary sources of revenue. The financial models assumed that the tipping fees will decline in 2025, in line with the solid waste master plan recommended action of no longer accepting waste from industrial and commercial clients. The city receives roughly $17 million annually from producers of blue and black box materials. It is assumed that the city will no longer receive any revenue related to blue and black box materials by 2026. The affordability model also included conservative estimated projections for other sources of revenue, including additional fees related to the sale of yellow bags and the sale of renewable natural gas. Next slide. This is a sample bill for a single residential property valued at $415,000. You can see the tax funding for waste diversion that shows up in the tax distribution by service section of the property tax bill. In this example of an average residential property, the amount is $56, but a home valued above the average would be paying more, and one valued below would be paying less for waste diversion. The section on the left side of the slide shows at the bottom of the tax bill, and it is the fee out portion of the solid waste services funding. All single residential properties pay the flat fee of $145 annually. The combined charge for an average home is $201. If council approves moving to a fully recoverable fee, the line on the right would be eliminated from the tax bill, and the line on the right that shows up and on the left that shows up at the bottom of the bill would increase to $227 annually to account for the loss of commercial property tax and other tax-supported allocations. This is an increase of $26 annually for the average residential property, only $2 a month. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, moving it to a fully recoverable fee is more equitable, flexible, clear, and more sustainable. Comme j'ai mentionné auparavant, le passage à des frais entièrement récupérables est plus équitable, plus flexible, plus clair et plus durable. Cela alignera le financement des services de
This will
gestion
align the funding of the solid waste garbage to the water service fee.
Utility model similar to water services. Equity. Currently, 30% of the solid waste budget is funded by property tax and citywide revenues, which is paid by all property taxpayers in varying amounts depending on the value of their property. A fee would be charged only to users of the service and would be a flat fee. Flexibility. A fully recoverable fee can be better aligned to the overall service requirements, similar to a utility model that is self-funding on a 100% cost recovery basis. To be clear, the cost of delivering the solid waste services is much clearer, and fees can be tied more directly to the service that's provided. And sustainability. Fee increases can be planned over a longer time horizon to provide smoother and more predictable fee increases and more predictable funding for the service similar to water services. Staff recommend moving to a fully recoverable fee for solid waste services, but to also explore the feasibility of phasing it in as part of the 2025 budget exercise. Next slide. This chart provides an overview of the key financial assumptions that were built into each scenario, highlighting the key differences between status quo and the solid waste master plan. These costs are inflated and occur at different points in time in the affordability model. You can't add these numbers up to compare one to the other. Comparisons of total operating and capital costs over time for each scenario will be presented in the next slide. The first column highlights the regulatory requirements that were included in the financial model that are mandatory. They impose a cost that council has no choice but to accept. There's also approximately 68 million in capital expenditures required just to maintain services and existing assets over the next 10 years. The solid waste master plan includes 71 million in service enhancements over and above the regulatory requirements to implement the recommended actions and extend the life of the landfill to 2050. The recommended actions also add an estimated 20 million in operating costs annually by 2031, as compared to an additional 15 million in debt servicing that would be required by 2033 based on a status quo scenario where the new landfill is required by 2036. The new landfill or residual management systems estimated in the financial model are very conservative Class D estimates, including a 40% contingency. And the landfill implemented by 2050 is in inflated dollars compared to the landfill implemented sooner in 2036. Trail landfill closure costs have not been included in the estimates since there is a separate reserve to cover those costs, but it's important to note that those costs are incurred sooner if we maintain status quo. Estimated and projected costs for organics processing post-2030 have also been included in both scenarios. Next slide. This slide clearly demonstrates the minimal impact on annual operating costs of each scenario. The solid waste master plan adds 20 million annually, but the status quo requires an investment in a new landfill much sooner, incurring debt servicing costs much sooner than for the solid waste master plan. It is the capital budget that is most impacted by status quo. The blue line shows the status quo investment required as soon as 2029 for 2036 implementation, while the recommended actions of the solid waste master plan pushes that investment out much further. The cost is higher starting in 2047, but with the time value of money, they are not that far apart. Again, these are very rough Class D estimates shown in inflated dollars. The real differentiator between these two scenarios is demonstrated on this next slide. Next slide. So this slide shows the impact of each scenario on the solid waste reserve fund. As I mentioned earlier, the reserve fund has been in a negative position since 2013. With each budget over the past 5 years, we have been increasing fees to replenish the reserves slowly over time. Reserves are critical for financial sustainability, to smooth fluctuations in funding needs, to ensure predictability for ratepayers, and to put money aside for future investments. Les réserves sont essentielles à la viabilité financière pour
This investment is essential to deal with funding fluctuations and to ensure predictability for taxpayers as well.
The status quo scenario would not only decimate the solid waste reserves, it would place it in a substantial deficit position that would take many years to recover and impact the city's overall liquidity and possibly our credit rating. The solid waste master plan, on the other hand, defers this significant investment, gives us time to explore other solutions and adjust as required over time, but more importantly, allows us to slowly build up the necessary reserves to invest in whatever solution and new landfill requirements are required in the future. These models are based on a funding strategy that relies on a combination of cash and debt that is affordable. The only problem is that the status quo drains our cash and reduces our overall city reserves in order to do so. Status quo is not financially prudent or sustainable. Slide. So this slide is a summary of the estimated projected charge for an average single residential home over the next 10 years. This is for information purposes only, to show the possible increase in the charge and demonstrate that the annual fee of this critical and mandatory city service remains within very reasonable levels. The long-range financial plan that these charges are based on will be updated on a regular basis as new information becomes available and at least every 5 years as input to the asset management plans. Council is not approving these fees as part of the long-range financial plan. Fees will be set annually and approved by council as part of the budget process. The first line shows this projected status quo fee. In the status quo scenario, the fee would go up by 11% in 2025 just to meet the core operating and capital requirements and increase to 371 by 2034. If council approves the recommended actions of the solid waste master plan, the fee goes up by 17% in 2025 to fund some of the recommended actions, and by 2034, the fee is just $10 more than what would be paid in the status quo scenario. In comparison to status quo, the recommended actions only cost between 10 and 13 more annually, or just $1 per month. The average increase in the status quo fee is 5%, and the average increase in the solid waste master plan fee is 5.4%. Staff recommend moving to a fully recoverable fee for solid waste services, but to also explore the feasibility of phasing in this fee as part of the 2025 budget exercise. Next slide. So implementing the solid waste master plan will increase the annual charge to ratepayers, but only slightly more than the increase required if the master plan was not implemented. For a marginally higher price, the recommended actions can be implemented, the life of the landfill can be extended, environmental benefits can be achieved, and financial sustainability can be reestablished for this essential service. For a
slightly higher price, the recommended actions can extend the lifespan of the landfill. Environmental benefits can be obtained, and financial viability can be reestablished for this essential service.
Even with the increase in fees, Ottawa's solid waste fee would remain significantly lower than other comparable municipalities. The black line is the projected Ottawa fees compared to other municipalities' rate projections if we inflated their rates by just 2% each year. Ottawa still remains the lowest. Next slide. So based on the results of the solid waste long-range financial plan, the recommendations to council are as follows. Approve a funding plan that supports the solid waste master plan and recommended actions. Implement a fully recoverable rate model as opposed to the current hybrid model to be phased in if required as part of the 2025 budget. Establish a solid waste debt service limit of 15%, similar to other rate-supported services, and explore the feasibility of establishing a solid waste development charge as part of the next development charge background study. I will now hand it back to Alain to conclude the presentation.
Merci Isabelle, Shelley, et Nicole. So to
Thank
conclude,
you.
I want to remind members of council, media, and the public of what a critical juncture we're at right now when it comes to waste management at the City of Ottawa. À mesure que la population augmente et que la
As the population grows and the city evolves, we have to make sure that the waste management services remain reliable and affordable while evolving to meet the new challenges and needs.
The solid waste master plan will guide how we manage waste over the next 30 years in a socially, environmentally, and economically responsible manner. And the long-range financial plan sets out how we will keep waste services cost-effective and affordable in the long term. And as the chair mentioned in his intro, what residents can expect now and into the future is to pay a fair price for efficient, reliable waste collection services. Now, it's worth repeating that the city's landfill is filling up quickly, and to defer costly alternatives to managing waste, whether that be a new technology or a new landfill, we need to make changes now. And to do this, we must work together. The more residents reduce their waste, use their grain bins, and ensure recycling is maximized, remembering that recycling is now a cost paid by the province, we will be able to make an impact on diversion levels and cost deferrals. And council can set the framework for doing so through these two reports. Thank you, Chair and councillors. Understanding this is a lot of information. We really appreciate your time today. Un grand merci pour votre intérêt.
Thank you very much, Alain, Isabelle, Shelley, and Nicole. I'm going to go to councillors' questions. I did mention the number of councillors that were here at the beginning, but others have joined us too. Councillor Hill has joined us in person. Online, we have Councillor Kelly, Brown, and Luloff that have also joined us, in addition to Councillor Gower. So we're just going to take questions just by hands up, and then we're going to move to media questions after councillors have had a chance to answer the questions. So I'll look in person. Councillor Hill. Can we, is there a mic for him? Thanks so much.
Test.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Menard. We talk in Objective 5 about culture change and the challenge that that's going to present, that you're asking us as council to then represent to our residents, and that's going to challenge them. That's going to make them feel a bit uncomfortable, and we need to push that. And so I guess my question / comment is to make us / you a little bit uncomfortable, because something that I missed in this slide was the discussion about our relationship with the school boards here in Ottawa. Because if this is a 30-year plan, then I think we need to aggressively be tied to the hip with every one of our school boards so that there's active formal curriculum and engagements from grade kindergarten right through to talk through this, so that in 15 years it's them that's positively doing this because they know it and understand it, as opposed to the other mechanisms of promotion. Because as you know, I've been involved with your office and such, talking to people, and people will listen sort of, but it's hard. Working people every day, they just don't have time to pay attention to the detail of a 50-slide deck on extremely complex waste to energy stuff. So I think the long-term engagement with our school boards needs to be formalized. It needs to be aggressive, and it needs to be embedded. Over.
I'll dive in there. Thank you, Councillor. And I really appreciate those points in your advocacy on that piece. So certainly with that enhanced investment in P&E, huge focus and recognize and hear you on that. So that will be that is part of the fundamentals of what we're recommending here today. And we've also recently started some additional work working actively with the school boards on just that. So not only outreach and engagement, but how can we do things differently in terms of working alongside to embed some of these important principles within the existing curriculum. So thank you.
Councillor Curry, a former school board trustee. You have 3 in a minute.
I certainly liked that comment, Councillor Hill. My question is about waste to energy. So my understanding was it sounded like it's almost off the table, but I'm wondering if you can comment. It's not completely off the table, but what will that look like, given that you're not recommending that here, but we will be building up our reserves. So what is the status now of the concept of waste to energy again?
Certainly. So maybe I'll start, and Isabel, if you want to dive in there. Thank you, Councillor. So it's certainly not off the table. So in terms of the waste plan, as you will recall, one of the recommendations was to consider waste to energy and additional residual waste management technologies like mixed waste processing. So as Council had directed through our motion last December when we tabled the draft waste plan, that feasibility study is underway. The feasibility study is underway, and we will be reporting back to Council by Q2 of next year with the results of that feasibility study and business case, so that you will have full insight into the environmental, the social considerations, and the financial considerations to help support making a decision. So the way that we'll be laying it out is looking at waste to energy incineration, landfilling, and mixed waste processing in combination. So it's certainly not off the table, but that big decision point comes next year.
Thank you. Can I have one more question?
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. One of our briefings, I asked about the model that Toronto has, and my mother lives in Toronto, and you can choose to get a small bin, a medium bin, or a large bin and pay that differential price. So would that also continue to be examined?
Absolutely, Councillor. So one of the recommended actions as part of the waste plan is containerized based service. So that would allow us, that in addition to the rate model that is being recommended today, would allow that flexibility for us to consider moving towards a variable rate system in the future.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the work that's gone into this. The increased rate is a positive move. You've suggested a number of initiatives like recycling of textiles and food strategy in an effort to reduce the amount of waste. Are those able to be paid for from the increased revenues that will come from the rate, or would those kinds of initiatives be paid for from the tax, the general tax base?
So the only thing that would stay on the tax is services that benefit the citywide, and so the public bins, garbage bins, but everything else would be on a fee.
So the increased rate would allow, for example, more repair cafes, and we can fund all that out of the increased rate.
Those are included in the cost. Yeah.
Okay, so come budget time, when you are proposing setting the rate year to year, will we have a fairly good understanding of what that will fund in terms of some of those waste reduction strategies and some options to increase those?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll look to see if there's some hands up line. I'm not seeing any right now. Vice Chair Carr, thank you.
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. I have a question with respect to measuring diversion. So we often talk about how much we've diverted, and a good example is we talk about the uptake in green bin usage when we decided to include plastics. But if you actually go to the organics facility, yeah, I think we say that we increased by, is it 3 or 6% use of the green bin? But in fact, if you go to the green bin facility, they're actually putting, I think it's about 11% into trash, right? So and when we have had, the blue bin and black bin programs, obviously those are now under provincial control, but 17% of what was put in the blue bin would actually go into trash. If you go to the facility and ask them, and I think it's 3% at the black bin. So how are we going to improve how we measure diversion? Because even when we talk about the tonnage that we intend to save in terms of going to the trail landfill, we can't guarantee that that might be being diverted out of our own landfill. But if we have like a textile diversion program where things up at Valley Village and they throw it into a private landfill, that's not actually diverting waste overall. So can we speak a little bit about the improvements in terms of how we're going to measure actual diversion and avoidance of waste?
Absolutely, Councillor. So maybe I'll start at high level and then dive into the textile example for you. So certainly that's something that we're looking at as part of some of those performance metrics are better practices in terms of diversion. Some of those details we have today, right? In terms of our contamination levels, those are really critical pieces of information that we get, especially as we're doing our 4-season waste audits, which we will be now undertaking every 2 years. So those will certainly be those additional elements that we are reporting back to council. So you have that fulsome picture. One of the other important metrics, kind of shifting not only the diversion perspective, that's where you don't truly see waste reduction. So that's why you're seeing some of those recommendations in terms of the targets in the waste plan, focusing more on waste generation and focusing on waste reduction. So with each action, there will be a set of performance measures that we will be tracking and recommending for council as we develop each of those actions. As the example for textiles, because it's a really good example in terms of not having a lot of good oversight or understanding of how well those programs are functioning. So with some of the changes that council approved as part of the new regulatory regime just last year on the textiles diversion program, we've included some mandatory reporting requirements in there to give us a better sense of tonnages, to give us a better sense of what is being diverted and what is still going to landfill. So you'll see those with each of the actions where we have those abilities to gather more data than we currently have access to today.
Okay, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. Just to back up what Councillor Hill was saying, I was just at Severn Avenue Public School yesterday, grade 3 class, and that's their favorite topic is garbage. So thanks to their teacher, Hannah, who was, of course, they need to be stimulated and be driven that direction. So that was kind of neat to hear from them just yesterday. So I think there's lots of room there. The kids are super interested in the topic. And so I'd like to see that. And yes, I'm a former school board trustee as well. So a bunch of us, I guess. But the other thing is parks. We've talked about this before. I realize they're not a huge percentage of the garbage, but they're extremely visible and they're symbolic. And, if you only have to go to Britannia Park on a Sunday morning after Saturday night, and there's tons and tons of garbage. But it's also, reminding people of ways to cut back on garbage there too. So much is unrecyclable, and that concerns me. there is a certain cynicism too among people about the blue box, and hopefully that will change over time because they don't believe everything's getting recycled. So we need to deal with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree about the schools. Every time I'm in a school, that is the topic that comes up. Doesn't matter the grade. It comes up repeatedly. And I know when we were at the board, that was discussed often too. Did staff want to make a comment about the blue box and other pieces?
Thank you so much. And 100% agree that our park spaces, if we can provide consistent service, so when they're at home, we're wanting to encourage the use of the recycling, the green bin. When they're out enjoying the green spaces, we want to provide those opportunities as well. And so that is one of the first pending council approval of the plan, looking to develop a strategy, recognizing that we have 1,000 parks across the city. Not all parks probably need 3 waste bins, but there may be other things that we've been trying to support and pilot, placing an organics bin where there's a high proponent of dog walkers. So that's probably a better option than putting in a blue bin for popping Gatorade cans when those sporting activities don't take place. So upon approval, coming back then with that strategy, looking to right size the type of diversion initiatives in our parks, and then bringing that back for approval to then formally roll out across the city.
Okay. I'm not seeing other hands up at the moment. Oh, sorry, Council. Actually, you know what? There's we've got Councillor Brown online, and then I'll come to you on the second round. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the team for the presentation today. My questions for Isabel. In terms of the property taxes and shifting from the hybrid rate model to just the rate model, what is the net effect on property taxes? So if we were to do it in one fell swoop, in 2025, we're just going to go to the rate. Other than the standard increase annually, is there a net difference where taxpayers would be paying more, ratepayers would be paying more than they are today with the split model?
So currently about 34 million is paid from tax. So that would be negative pressure in the 2025 budget. So reduction in pressures on the tax side.
So the net difference would be the same though, where instead of paying with 2 hands, we're just going to pay the full rate with 1?
For the average bill, yes.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. Action Suite 14 had reference with respect to some of the technology solutions to mixed waste processing, waste to energy. There was also reference to mechanical biological treatment, I think. I'm sorry, I'm sure you've told us before, but what is that?
That's okay. Thank you, Councillor. It's a great question. Mechanical biological treatment is essentially, it's taking the mixed waste processing, the front end processing, which is mechanically separating the recyclables and whatever remaining organics is in the garbage stream. And then it's taking that organic stream or the fraction from that, and it's running it through a biological process, which is essentially anaerobic digestion. So very similar to what we do with our wastewater treatment. And that's where you create biogas, which creates that renewable energy.
Okay, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Okay, just one final question. We're about to implement the 3-bag limit. I'm already getting concern from large families, with 5 kids and lots of diapers, etc. There seems to be a bit of a panic. Can you tell us about the way we're helping in larger households?
Certainly, Councillor. So I think on that the first and foremost, we do have the existing special considerations program. So that allows households who register that opportunity to set out a large garbage bag of diapers or incontinence products on the off week of regular garbage collection. So residents can apply for that today. And in addition to that, for the larger households, there is, through council's approval of leveraging the administration of the yellow bag for small businesses, those bags will become available for those instances where there is that need to set out additional waste. But again, encouraging a lot of those households, especially with kids, generating whether it be toys or additional clothes. There's a lot of incredible programs that we have through our Take It Back programs, or just even within communities and donations. So certainly encouraging those opportunities as well.
Thank you.
Can I
Thanks very much.
clarify my answer to Councillor Brown?
Yes, certainly. And then we'll go to Councillor Lowe.
Yeah, so I just, it occurred to me. So right now, the average bill is combined is $201. But because we're moving it all to a fee, the commercial properties that are now contributing will increase slightly to what now the residential will pay. So that was the one that's an extra $2 a month. It goes in from $201 to $227 total. Sorry about that.
Thanks for the clarification.
That's an important clarification. Thanks, Isabel. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. And thanks, Councillor Carr, for letting me go first. I do want to clarify that it's a 3-item limit. It's not a 3-bag limit. It's a very generous limit that I think it's actually a lot more generous than what a lot of municipalities are offering. So the question that I do have is, it seems like we're asking a lot of our residents here. They're going to pay marginally more. It's still more, and we're also asking them to sort of improve their practices and perhaps change what they're doing. In terms of on the city side, there's obviously going to be a gap that's left, right? Not everyone's going to comply. Not everyone's going to change their behavior. So on the city side, what are we doing to fill that gap? Like what can we do more to fill that gap in terms of the technologies we can use and that kind of stuff?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So I think if I understand correctly, it's understanding. So I think first and foremost, some of those technologies that council gave direction for us to start advance the feasibility and business case includes mixed waste processing. So certainly that is a proven technology that's used across the industry to mechanically separate any recyclables, any green bin waste that's still within the waste stream. So certainly that is an opportunity. I think a couple of different things as well, enhancing that promotion and education so that residents, we hear often, and we heard through engagement, there's not a broad-based knowledge of a lot of those programs that already exist. Textile diversion, a lot of those opportunities to take back to retailers. So certainly enhancing our promotion and education, but also improving some of that program accessibility. And a lot of the different reuse initiatives, as an example, repair cafes, accessibility and making sure that they're available close to residents. That's certainly a priority we heard loud and clear from members of council, members of the public, and you'll see reflected through some of the recommendations and the funding recommended as well as part of the plan.
Thanks very much. So in their new zoning bylaw, there are some additional provisions, let's say, for that promote more home-based businesses. And in those cases, these are still primarily residential properties that will generate more waste as a result of their business practices. I'm not saying all of them, like a law office, for example, is not going to, but something like a home-based florist might, right? So are there any sort of considerations for them in terms of the limits that we're imposing, or are they more or less going to have to purchase those small yellow bags?
Thank you for the question. And as part of the work that we're doing this fall is looking at our existing yellow bag program, recognizing that when council approved it a number of years ago, it was to support to ensure that small businesses had the ability to recycle. Now with the transition, we do need to explore what then should and could a yellow bag program for small businesses look like. And this then may be an opportunity for some of those properties to register or have some sort of consideration depending on how they're set up. But I think that that's something that the staff will need to explore moving forward.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. I just have another question with respect to diversion efforts, and it follows a little bit from Councillor Lowe's question as well. Early on in the presentation, it was mentioned about with respect to fees and that our fees are lower, and specifically Edmonton was mentioned. And Edmonton is a really good example of reuse and diversion efforts. And I appreciate that when we're talking all of the examples that have been given about the diversion efforts that are going to happen in Ottawa, and different programs that we have. And just to list some examples, we talked about repair cafes, which are one place to repair appliances. We have blue and black bin recycling programs, organics, which are curbside, textile diversion we do through charity boxes. We have bulky items we can pull up a furniture place charity to have them taken. The one thing that if you're an avid waste diverter is all of these places are spread out all over the place. And so there's not really a city role in terms of consolidating these diversion efforts. So there's many different facilities that exist to recycle them, but they're dependent on the stream. And the one thing that Edmonton does is that they have these eco stations, and they also have a reuse center where they resell things like that sort of thing. So if we're going to ask customers to pay more, one of the things that makes it easier for people to recycle and divert waste is to have the city play a role in consolidating those efforts. So is that something that is going to be considered throughout the solid waste master plan? Because definitely there's the education piece, but if you're asking people to drive to a whole bunch of different places depending on the item, that is not convenient.
It's a really great point, Councillor, and certainly just for a little bit of history on that piece, that was certainly one of the opportunities that we did look at as part of the waste plan. And we're recommending at this point that that option be deferred for a refresh in the 5-year waste plan. So there's a couple of reasons behind that. The first being the ongoing, some of the uncertainties with the transition to individual producer responsibility and some of the issues that we're still working on ironing out. So and whether or not there would be opportunities to partner, as an example, with some of the producer-based organizations as part of some of these facilities, but also the need for us within the first 5 years of the plan to really identify some of those end markets. So we need to identify those end markets for recycling of those different products. So certainly not off the table, but something we're recommending as part of the waste plan refresh to look at.
Yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, just to clarify, and just know the Edmonton system, you can take your tires there. There's different items that you can pay for, batteries, any cycle you can take there. And I certainly don't mean to infer it has a superior system. They do have a superior hockey team, and I feel bad saying that. But anyhow, I'll pass it over.
Go Oilers. I want to go back. I think, Isabel, this is a question for you. I want to go back. I'm trying to grasp the difference in the rate structure and how the rate structure is now and how it's being proposed to change, because I understand that how it's being proposed to change is being described as equitable. I think I understand how it may be seen as equal, but I just want to dig into it a little bit. So if I understand correctly, currently, everybody pays a flat rate. Every property owner pays a flat rate, and then we pay a tax rate based on the value of the home. And I think I understand what you're saying is that rather than that system, and so currently, everybody's going to pay X dollars, but then if my house is valued at 2 million, I will pay this much more. But if my house is valued at 300,000, I will pay this much more. So currently, the higher property owner is going to pay more. If I understand correctly, it's now going to be replaced with a flat global fee that everyone will be paying regardless of the value of their home. And I don't remember what was the average value you based that on, but if that is the case, it sounds to me that for somebody who has on the higher end of the property value, they will be paying they will have a net negative impact or savings on their adjustment, but somebody at the lower end is going to end up ponying up more. And so I understand how that is equal, but I'm not sure how that is equitable if those who if the greatest property values are going to end up saving from this. Can you speak to that a bit, please?
Yeah, so you can equate it to, so the idea is to pay the same amount for the same service. And The way it's currently structured, it's not equitable. We're trying to get something that's more fair. And so, but understanding that if there's an impact, that we could potentially phase it in so that we minimize that impact. But because we had it a certain way in the past, and only because commercial properties did contribute to recyclables, it was, it made sense at the time to put it on the property tax, but all of that is disappearing. And we need to move to more of a utility-based model. And it's much more equitable this way.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing other questions. So thank you to councillors for great questions and for being here. We're going to take, I think, 5 or 10 minutes to reset before we move on with the media. And we'll get, I think, Chloe, you're going to be speaking with media afterwards. Okay, perfect. So we'll get you all set up and then you can ask questions of our staff. Take about a 5 to 10 minute recess. Thanks.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Aziz Khalil, and I will be your moderator today. Je serai votre modérateur aujourd'hui.
I'll be your moderator today.
Agency to ask their question in alphabetical order. You may ask one question with a follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des
We'll now be answering questions from the media, and you are able to ask one question and one follow-up.
CBC.
All right. My question is, I guess, probably best for Ms. Jasmine. So I'm just hoping that you could explain as simply as possible for people who are paying property tax, what will the difference be between the model we have now and the new model in terms of both how much they might be paying on average, but also how they will pay?
So the fee will continue to be on the tax bill, and on the bottom of your tax bill, you see that flat fee. That number will go up. And so for the average, and we define the average as 415,000. And so if you're higher, it'll go down a little bit. If you're lower, it'll go up a little bit, but we're not talking about huge dollars. So the amount that you now see on diversion will be added to that fee. And so combined, the average is about $201. Now that we're taking away commercial property taxes from that number, the amount going to the residential will go up slightly. So instead of 201, it'll be $227 on average for the year. And so that's about $2 a month.
And I saw on the graph that it's going up a little bit more, I guess, than other cities, but still not, we're not going to be reaching anywhere close to what other cities have. Is there something that we're missing out on that we would be able to pay on, or would we be paying more money into our reserves that we can't if we were to raise it further? I'm just wondering what the decision-making was there.
So right now, the rates that we're projecting is based on the solid waste master plan. So we've costed it out fully. We understand the operating costs associated with it, the capital costs associated with it, but they are still very much estimated costs, very conservative estimates too. So like we said, we're more confident in the first 10 years, less confidence in the last 18 years. So that's why we gave you fee estimates for first 10 years. And they're still estimates. They'll be defined and set as part of the budget process.
Sorry, just from a program standpoint, kind of, it's the similar question. When you were making these kinds of decisions, were you thinking about the feasibility of the financial program? Like, were you trying to take into account how much fees would go up?
Absolutely. So in terms of the direction that was provided from council when developing the plan was to look at and really balance the triple bottom line. So equally balancing the social, the environmental, as well as the financial outcomes. So it was certainly something that is heavily being considered. Also, as we were speaking with residents, a core fundamental component of the discussions were, you know, how far, how fast, and at what cost to residents. So that was also a fundamental part of engagement that has been incorporated into the plan.
Good morning. So based on some of the steps that are now going to be taken, the goal is to extend the landfill life to 2049, as I understand it. Is that reasonable? Like, is it reasonable with these steps, including the three item limit? Can we reasonably extend our landfill's life to 2049?
Yes, and I think what you see here are a comment, I think bringing in first and foremost, the importance of recognizing, again, there was no one silver bullet solution. So the requirement why you're seeing multiple actions, focusing on waste reduction, diversion, opportunities to extend our landfill within its existing footprint, banning commercial waste from our landfill, as well as utilizing private sector landfills. So very conservative thought, effort, and very conservative estimates. So we certainly do believe it is achievable, but we also need the support of our residents. So as you see this with, you know, introducing organics in multi-residential buildings, the importance of participating in that, recycling programs, and the same sort of thing with our 3 item limit that'll come into place this fall.
I'll just add a little bit to that. I think it's one of the key pieces too, is that we'll be reporting back annually. And so then that way we're able to confirm that the actions that we're putting in place are achieving those results. And I will also remind everyone that landfills are dynamic environments. And so I think that annual reporting back is critical in order to ensure that we are we're taking the steps to achieve our goal to extend the life of the landfill.
And so just my follow-up, maybe Alain, you can comment, or I'm looking at you, Nicole, whoever. Are we just delaying a really big decision to go incinerator or new landfill by taking these steps? Are we delaying that big decision that we could be taking right now?
I think what we're delaying is the cost of that solution. I think what was presented to you is there's no doubt within the 30-year plan that that next big expense will be required. What we're trying to do is push that big expense as far out as we can. And by doing that is basically we're leveraging and we're maximizing the capacity that we currently have in the landfill now. When you've seen basically from one of the slides that Isabel provided that there is a cost of every year that we extend the life of the landfill, there's a cost deferral to that. There's a value to the city. There's a financial value to the city of doing that. So the more we can do that, we're able to push those big expenses that, yes, are inevitable, but we push those out as far as possible into the future. That's the big value.
But would it get more expensive though? Like if we down the road, as opposed to a new landfill now or an incinerator now, 30 years, would it not be more expensive?
Over time, yes, the inflationary cost, but I think the piece that was provided in a reserve fund analysis that Isabel provided is we don't have the money right now to pay for that expense. So that would have to be done through drawing down reserves, high debts. The intent is basically providing time to be able to build those reserves for those big expenses. So when they come, the dollars are there. Will inflation continue to occur over time? Yeah, it will continue to occur over time, but we're also going to be able to keep up with that as part of our financial plan, which we don't have right now.
And if I can just add, with the time value of money, yes, $1 in the future is worth more. So it's with the number's bigger, but the dollar's worth more later on too. So it's pretty much a wash. Yeah.
You answered that in French as well. Sorry, what you had just said about the cost. Yeah. If you could just take both of the things that you said and just make them one comment, that would be the best.
Oui, la question était au niveau des.
Well, the question was about costs. The major investments, are they inevitable? Well, they are, of course. Yes, that goes without saying. In the plan, you see that at some point we'll need a new landfill or alternative technology. The goal of the plan really is to push that investment out as far as possible. I mean, currently we don't have a financial capacity in the reserves to fund this type of investment currently. So the more we can push that out, the further we can push it out, the better it'll be for rebuilding the reserves. This will also allow us to maximize the current capacity we have at the landfill site. We've already invested in that, so that we can really push the investment for the new technology out as far as possible. And we hope that we'll have the money at that point to pay for that investment.
Can someone on the panel address what widely used and proven technologies the city will be exploring in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, costing out, and how that timeline would work? Well, first of all, what would be the technologies? And number two, so what would the process be in terms of presenting them as options to City Council?
Yes, certainly great question. So in terms of, a lot of work was done as part of the waste plan to look at a whole host of different technologies. There's certainly a lot on market, but not necessarily proven at a commercial scale that would be viable to meet the city's future needs. So the two technologies that as staff we narrowed down to recommend: mixed waste processing, which essentially is a mechanical process that pulls out organics and recyclables from the waste stream, and you can send those off for further diversion, as well as waste to energy incineration. That alongside landfilling. Certainly landfilling is still a very viable solution. So in terms of the next steps on that, council did last December direct staff to begin the feasibility and business case. So we will be back in front of council next year, about approximately midway through next year, presenting those different options and for council, presenting a recommendation for council to consider at that time. So at that time, we will also lay out the next steps in terms of what a process would be. Usually, depending on the provincial approval process, design, construction, community engagement that's required as part of those provincial approval processes, that can take anywhere from between 8 to 15 years.
And can somebody address what kind of waste we may see diverted in the next 5 years that we do not divert currently?
Certainly, I would say 3 great opportunities. First and foremost, enhancing textile diversion. So opportunities exist today, but we know there's an opportunity to improve diversion with about 5% of textile waste still, or 5% of our waste stream being textile waste. There's an opportunity with bulky waste, especially bulky waste. So think mattresses, furniture items, a number of items that make its way to landfill today don't necessarily need to be there, as well as home renovation construction materials.
Bonjour, j'ai une question sur le plan.
Well, I have a question on the financial plan from Ms. Jasmine. Could you explain, as you explained in English to my CBC colleague, what the impact will be on people's tax bills? How will it work? There are many figures in your tables, and for ordinary people, it's difficult to understand. Could you explain that in simple terms? For the property tax bill for average home in Ottawa, worth $415,000. Well, they're paying $56 in taxes and $45 in rates. And now we're going to take away the $56 and we'll add it to the $145, $201. That'll be the total. So it won't be 201, and it'll be 226, $26 extra for everyone. For those who have higher tax bills, it will go down. For those who have lower tax bills, it will go up a bit. It's about $2 per month more. I don't know who can answer my next question, and it deals with the support of Ottawans for this new strategy. It's a pretty comprehensive strategy. We saw that in the presentation. How will you get people behind you? How will you educate people on this? And how will you bring them to zero waste? So you're quite right. In fact, it's a plan which is very complex. It's over 30 years. After all, we won't be able to accomplish everything in the short term, of course, but one of the elements that is key in the developing of the plan, which will continue to be a cornerstone of the plan, is to continue to work with community on education, on information. And you're already seeing the approach that we're planning to take in terms of the implementation of the 3 limit. The first few months are really devoted to informing people. If people are not complying with the new standards, if we see that, we're not going to just leave the garbage on the side of the road. We're going to leave them with information. We're going to follow up with the residents so they can understand what opportunities are available to reduce their garbage, what programs exist also to help them. And these are comments that we've had from residents. Now, they've said that they support the overall goal of the plan, but they say it's very, very complex and they want to learn more about it. And that's really part and parcel of our plan. We have programs that are provided, which are really focused on information and education. One last French question on recycling. people are encouraged to recycle more, but in the figures we see that there are many recyclable items that end up in the dump. Have you planned to increase recycling? How is this going to actually happen? Well, one of the elements right from the outset, we've identified the fact that there's already a lot of garbage that goes to landfill, which is recyclable. So we have to continue to encourage residents to separate their materials so we can maximize recycling. In addition, there's a tax advantage for residents because recycling is under provincial responsibility and not under our responsibility. So it's in the interests of residents to maximize their recycling because that's paid for by the provincial government. It's not paid for by their taxes. But we recognize that this is, of course, an area where we have to do more education. We have to work on that. We have to work on encouraging people to recycle more. And if I pick up on what I said earlier, even with the 3-bin limit, there are many items, of course, that will be over capacity. But these are items, of course, which could have been separated and could have been put in the green bin or the blue bin. And this would help them to reduce what goes to landfill.
This concludes today's media availability. Ceci conclut le point de presse d'aujourd'hui. Thank you. Merci.